Everyone could please just take their seats. Okay, if you could please take your seats, we're going to make a start. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Today, I'm just to introduce myself. I'm Julia Beeden. I'm the Catchment Programme Manager at Water Resources East, working across a number of our projects and pilot and research projects, which will ultimately, hopefully, feed into a much more kind of integrated and multi-sector catchment approach regional plan in future. I'm really delighted to be helping out today, and so we'll just crack on with session 2. Session 2 is about new monitoring methods used to improve the resilience to water shortages. And we've got a number of speakers today. I will just also remind you about Slido and the questions, if you can please continue to put your questions on. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this session. And that can cover questions for the speakers that we had before the break. So hopefully that'll be quite a fulfilling and exciting discussion. First of all, I'm going to introduce you to Sarah Gelpke, who is from Norfolk Rivers Trust, and she is going to come and talk to us about the River Wensum Citizen Science Project, which was funded through Water for Tomorrow. Sarah, come and join us.
Perfect. Good afternoon, bonjour. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Wensum River and citizen science. The Wensum is the largest chalk stream in Norfolk, 60 to 75 kilometres, with a catchment of 690 kilometres squared. It's very much lowland agriculture. It contains a network of drainage ditches, spring-fed tributaries, lowland agricultural water bodies. The Wensum Catchment Partnership is a CABBALR group composed of academics, statutory agencies, conservation NGOs, and private companies, whose main aim is to improve the health of the River Wensum. That's a big ask, but one thing that we didn't have was we had very little, or in fact no data on the Wensum headwaters in terms of water quality. So we were very keen to build data evidence to help prioritise and target any restoration work in the catchment. So the project was supported very much by Water for Tomorrow, and it's one of the local projects. It's not part of the larger participatory monitoring work. And thanks to Water for Tomorrow, we were able to run a feasibility assessment for the whole of the catchment, looking at how feasible is it to do citizen science monitoring. So Steve Lane, who's in the first picture, unfortunately couldn't be with me today, was going to be here, but he identified 80 points on the whole of the river catchment which were safe for citizen science to access. He identified a methodology to collect the data, and here we see some of the methodology, collecting water in buckets, using something like a HANA phosphorus checker for phosphorus levels, and recording the data on an app. So this was a whole method from getting the sample to being able to look at the water quality. And he identified a set of accurate, cost-effective, and user-friendly equipment for citizen science to use, with some costings as well. Sorry, I'm not sure. There we go. That's very good. Following on from the feasibility study in the Norfolk Rivers Trust, we were lucky to have some Coca-Cola funding and some additional funding, thanks to Quarry from Water for Tomorrow, for some kit equipment, especially dissolved oxygen meters. So we ran a 6-month pilot between the feasibility study and the start of the Casco project, which I don't know if there's going to be more said on this later. But basically, CASCO is a project looking at a national approach to citizen science. The 6-month pilot ran from July to December on the headwaters of the Wensum only. We trained 13 citizen scientists, both in the classroom to understand water quality, what is water science and water chemistry, but also practical field training using the equipment outside. They were equipped to carry out weekly monitoring, so it's every week, 17 sites for 6 months. So their dedication is to be honoured out in all weathers. But they were also participating in and analysing the data, planning water blitzes, looking down into more granular detail. And this is really important because we're trying to also, through this process, develop a sort of river guardian movement where local people are equipped and empowered to test the water, but also to understand what's happening and to lobby and advocate for improved water quality. Right. And here are just a few pictures of some of the volunteers down in ditches, a set of the equipment, and holding the ever-present water bucket, water sampling basket. So we were very lucky that one of our volunteers was a GIS data expert, so she could take all the data that came through on the app to a spreadsheet and make visualizations for us, which has been incredibly useful, both in terms of the volunteers themselves looking at the data and understanding what is happening in the river, but also sharing this with the members of the Wensum Catchment Partnership, saying, there you are, saying, just to show them where our citizen scientists, and this is a 6-month, for you, the left is a 6-month accumulation, for example, of the phosphorus data for those Wensum headwaters. And you can see from this, the red and the orange are showing where there are high levels of phosphate. And these we have a whole range of different visualizations, but I just thought I'd give you a couple of examples to show what these citizen science have been able to show. The results have been shared in some cases with landowners, but this is one of the sensitive issues, is now we have the data, what's the next step? How do we work together to improve the health of the river? On the right, we have a water blitz that was planned you can see in the bottom south-east, data points 7, 9, 10, 15, 16. We then went for a much more granular look. We'd found quite a high phosphate at 0.14, and so 0.14 is actually 0.17 on the water blitz. We went and looked at every single tributary and ditch leading into that high phosphate point to see if we could understand point source, pollution for this, where was it coming from, all with a view of not naming and shaming, but trying to find resolutions with local people and landowners about how can we improve the health of this river. This data evidence, as I said, has been shared with the Catchment Partnership. And just recently, Steve has done a correlation between the EA, Environment Agency monitoring stations, and the citizen science data for phosphate. And we're very excited because it is really close correlation. So in terms of accuracy for phosphate, we feel pretty happy that we've got something viable that can be used. Right. Really just, I'm sorry, there's a lot of words on this, so I think I'm just going to pick out the main highlights. Okay, so one of the big achievements is the first ever citizen science work on the Wensum that's ever been done. It is sustainable. The one issue constantly is funding for kit and equipment, but I think we have started a movement of river guardians who are very keen to keep this going. We have 13 volunteer citizens. They're aged 17 to 70, so we're trying really hard to involve a range of people. It's always very difficult for young people because they don't have transport to access some of these points. So we've put them near the cities where they can get to, or Fakenham. They've collected 267 pieces of data so far. Well, that's by December. There's more now. We've been lucky to have a real range of volunteer skills because citizen scientists come with a background, and a lot of them have been involved in limnology, they've been involved in water quality testing, they're scientists, but there's also people with a social background. So looking at the skill set of our citizen scientists, they want to do more, and we'd like to support them to do that. There's been a fair bit of awareness raising. 2 of our volunteers were involved in the development of a WWF restoration documentary series coming up soon, so hopefully you'll see them showing exactly how they do water testing and why they want to do it. And the data now is included in the Wensum Catchment Partnership and Water Quality Working Group, which is part of that partnership, in planning and prioritisation on the headwaters. So they are directly contributing to improving the health of the Wensum. We have some way to go on that. Just recently as well, we have started up a group on the Tud, which is a tributary in the south, which has been shown to have very high levels of phosphate, and we want to try and drill down to understand that as well. So the next steps, we want to develop the survey system and the ArcGIS, because the problem is at the moment is the data comes in, we analyze it, we put it into visualization and then share it, but it can be up to 2 months before the citizens see the data. So we'd like to make this really immediate if possible. We want to reduce opportunities for data error, and we've been doing quite a lot of work on that. And Elle Claiborne, the new volunteer coordinator, has been working closely with all the citizen scientists to check that they completely understand the equipment, the app, how to load data. One thing that has been difficult is to include water flow, discharge and levels in the citizen science data collection. But the questions have been asked about, what is the river level? Can you see the river bed? What is the length of flow? And we found that 40% of our nominated monitoring points were dry all last year because of drought, which was, and still are. So in a sense, we are getting data on water scarcity, but we will hopefully be using some new equipment for flow and discharge. Data is a big issue. I'm not a data expert, but we're trying to align the data coming from citizen science with that from the Environment Agency, from the University of East Anglia, so that we can have a shared data platform, hopefully along the whole catchment. So at a glance, you can sort of look at the river, identify where we might need to investigate further, get a picture of the nutrient levels and flow in the river. And finally, eventually, we'd like to scale up to catchment-wide monitoring. So I think, c'est moi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's fantastic to see the scale of that monitoring, and hopefully we'll see more and more of that kind of local work in the future on water quality and other areas of water management. What Sarah doesn't know is that I'm about to come and talk to her later on about some water resource modelling, monitoring. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a presentation from the Environment Agency, and I'll welcome Mahmoud Tabaqchali to the stage to talk to you about building a rainfall simulator and hopefully what they then used it for. Come and join us.
Hello. Yep. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mahmoud Tabaqchali. I work with the Environment Agency. I'm engaged in the Water for Tomorrow project as a data and monitoring specialist. Today, I'll be talking about the rainfall simulator that we built, why we built it, and how we built it. So as you are already aware of the prospects for droughts for England and specifically the Eastern England, just to remind ourselves what a drought could look like, just last year, 2022, looking at one of the pilot catchments for this project, which was East Suffolk. So if we look at the rainfall that we received during summer of 2022, the period between April and September 2022, we received 137 millimeters of water rainfall. Now, to put that into perspective, that is less than half of the long-term average. So we would usually, for that period of time, for that region, we would usually expect around 280 rather than 140. Now, the Stark satellite image on the right does a better job at conveying the message. It looks like a Mediterranean country for that region. So what are we deciding to do for this work package? Now, as rainfall decreases, the value for that rain will increase during drought. So we need to do the most for that water when it is available. So what we're doing, we're trying to develop a data collection and monitoring system that can monitor the behavior of rainwater throughout the soil for different land management practices. Our approach was to develop a system that is primarily comprised of two components. The first component is the actual rainfall simulator, and then some soil moisture probes that could actually monitor soil moisture. So what the rainfall simulator is a portable tool that could produce an intensity and duration controlled rainfall event. So we would basically decide, we're trying to simulate an artificial rainfall event for the study, so we could control the duration and intensity. And of course, these soil moisture probes would allow us to kind of monitor the dynamics of water once it is in contact with the soil. So this is the design concept. What you see on the screen is just the frame of the simulator. It is made out of plastic pipes and wooden planks. It is designed to be portable, easy to assemble and disassemble, and to carry on site. The dimensions are clear. It is a 1 meter cube, so we are focusing on a 1 meter squared surface area for the application. We then went into the real world and tried to build one. So this is actually taken in the Kelvedon office of the Environment Agency. We purchased raw materials, cut them to dimension, and put them together. So looking at the image on the left, you can see the different components of the system. So starting from the bottom, we have these wooden planks that actually have multiple purposes, first of which it acts as a base for the structure to hold it stable. Another purpose, they act as bunds to actually force the surface runoff once the rainfall simulator is applied to flow in one direction. Now we would usually place that down gradient, down slope, and then in the field application we would dig a trench at the opening zone where we would actually collect the surface runoff into a bucket. Next, we can see these plastic pipes. They're just plastic pipes that hold the structure. Then the shower head that is used to distribute the water on the plot. Next, it's connected to just a garden hose. Then we have a battery and pump, so that's a rechargeable portable battery and a pump. Finally, we have the water supply, which is flexible, depends on what is available. Now, in order to actually control the intensity, we had to figure out a system where we could control the flow and pressure. So in the schematic here, it's just an easy schematic of 2 ball valves and a return line. So the water would come from the left. Depends on our field calibration, we would calibrate for intensity, and the line that goes vertically up would actually go back to the water supply. Finally, we were looking at the distribution and uniformity of the rainfall event, because in real life it's pretty uniform, but when you have a single water source, we had to go through different trials of different shower heads and different patterns of water flow to get the best consistency that we were able to achieve. Now, to further improve on that, we could try more industrial sprinklers that could actually achieve better uniformity for the rainfall event. Next, we carried it to the field, now thanks to Anna Beam from Suffolk Flag and the landowners who facilitated the land access that we managed to get in the Ox catchment in East Suffolk. Here on the left, you could see our project manager digging trenches in East Suffolk. As you can see, the system is actually easy to carry into the field. It could all fit into a medium-sized vehicle and then assembled on site without any special equipment and really no expertise whatsoever. So when we do apply it in the field, we need to recalibrate for flow and make sure that we're getting consistency of intensity and distribution. So next is when we try to actually apply it or test it in the real world with the help of the soil moisture probes. Now, when we tried it in the field, we faced some challenges with the wind because it was carrying all the rain out of the box that we were looking at. So we made a makeshift wind barrier to keep the rainfall within the plot. The picture in the middle is actually what the soil moisture probe looks like, the one that we used. It has an integrated rainfall gauge. It uses telemetry and would upload the data into the cloud where we could access it via the web. It is real-time data that gets uploaded. What the results would look like is this chart here. It's actually two charts. The one on top monitors rainfall. So you can see a rainfall event there. The x-axis is time. The y-axis is the millimeters of rain. The chart below is the soil moisture across the soil profile. So these soil moistures would monitor up to 55 centimeters in depth. And it is demonstrated by the different lines, the different depths. So the first one would be at 5 centimeters. The second one at 15, 25, 35, 45. And the last, I'm not sure if you can see, it's a purple line that's at 55 centimeter depth. You can see that there is a spike in soil moisture. You can't see, but that's the 11th of November without any natural rainfall being triggered by the rainfall gauge. That is the case because that was actually the result from a trial that we did in November. You could see that the system works as intended. There was a spike in the entire soil moisture profile of this plot due to the application that we carried away. A few days later, we can see another smaller spike, and that was due to actually a natural rain that occurred on the 15th of November. Of course, our trial for testing purposes used very high intensity rainfall due to the difference in the spike that you could see. Very early indications that we observed during these trials is that established cover and the depth of cultivation actually influenced the movements throughout the soil profile. We also noticed that established cover could actually resist or have a likeliness of resisting soil cracking during dry weather, and that soil cracking can persist into winter despite heavy rainfall and can occur below depth of cultivation. So what is next? Next is the potential uses beyond March 2023. So we urge environmental and water actors to actually adopt this system for data monitoring and data collection. We are already aware a few water actors are interested in using the system, such as Water Resources East. What it can do, it could potentially enable us to explore nature-based solutions in capturing rainfall water, the resource that is becoming ever more sacred and valuable, I hope. It could help us understand the efficacy of irrigation for different soil types and for different land management practices. It could help us in understanding the relationships between the land management practice in the field and the moisture retention content for irrigated and non-irrigated crops. It could also help us on the surface. It could help us study the relationships between these different soils and the runoff ratios, and could help us improve flood resilience and erosion. Finally, we hope that this simulator is able to help farmers to better plan for water shortages and water droughts, become more resilient, and manage their land management, manage their lands more effectively. Finally, I would like to thank you all and those watching online for coming here. Thank you very much and merci.
Thank you very much indeed, Mahmoud. And that's quite a relevant one for me, as mentioned, because Water Resources East, particularly myself, have signed up to use that equipment again. Not at all because of any interest in water resources, but because Hugh told me it was very good for building my upper arm strength, lugging large volumes of water miles from the car. So watch this space. Maybe next year I'll be really buff. Thank you very much indeed. And just a reminder again to put your questions on Slido. Next, we're going to move to northern France and hear about setting up a piezometric monitoring network from CABBALR. So Florine Decofour, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Merci à tous. Donc, je voudrais commencer cette présentation en rappelant rapidement le contexte de l'étude. Il faut rappeler, comme l'a dit M. Scarré en introduction de cette journée, la CABBALR est une très jeune agglomération, puisque nous sommes là depuis le 1er janvier 2020, que depuis il y a eu la crise Covid qui nous a fait ralentir un petit peu, que le contexte du nord de la France est que l'eau est une ressource abondante. Donc elle n'a jamais été une préoccupation majeure sur la région. Mais depuis que nous sommes là à l'agglomération en 2020, on a fait plusieurs constats. Tout d'abord un constat de l'augmentation des sécheresses en intensité et en quantité. Et aussi un constat de l'augmentation des problématiques de la ressource en eau, que ce soit sur des problématiques de qualité ou des problématiques de quantité. Donc les élus de la communauté d'agglomération, donc de la CABBALR, ont décidé de mettre en place certains outils de gestion de la ressource en eau, et notamment de mettre en place un réseau de mesures couplé à des logiciels de prédiction sécheresse. Cette étude, on a tout d'abord réalisé une étude d'implémentation d'un réseau de mesures. Donc il a fallu recenser les ouvrages existants. Ce réseau de mesures, c'est des piézomètres qui vont aller calculer les niveaux d'eau et certains paramètres qualitatifs dans les eaux souterraines, des limimètres qui vont calculer les hauteurs d'eau et les débits des cours d'eau, et des stations de météo qui vont, calculer la pluviométrie locale sur le territoire. Et donc l'étude permettait de recenser les ouvrages existants, les données publiques que nous pouvions récupérer, et de localiser les nouveaux ouvrages qui doivent être installés sur le territoire pour optimiser la prise de mesure de ces paramètres. Donc, les conclusions de l'étude ont permis de recenser 19 limimètres à créer sur le réseau, sur le territoire, de réaliser 9 stations météorologiques et de faire une centaine de piézomètres dans les trois aquifères principaux du territoire, c'est-à-dire l'aquifère du Landénien, l'aquifère de la Crée, réparti dans le Sénoturonien et le Sénomalien. On a décidé d'instrumenter ces 3 aquifères pour vérifier les relations qu'il y a entre les aquifères et qui ne sont pas aujourd'hui certifiés. Voilà. Dans le cadre de l'étude, on n'a réalisé que 30 piézomètres et non pas les 104 présentés ici, puisque le temps nous a été compté. Mais les 104 piézomètres sont prévus d'être faits dans les mois et les années futures. Ensuite, nous avons réalisé un dossier loi sur l'eau pour l'ensemble des piézomètres. C'est une procédure qui est obligatoire en France aujourd'hui pour tous les projets susceptibles d'impacter l'eau ou les milieux aquatiques. Donc, comme nous avons réalisé des piézomètres, il a été obligé de réaliser un dossier. Nous avons dû attendre le retour qui a été positif des services de l'État pour pouvoir réaliser ce projet. Donc ensuite, nous avons réalisé les 30 piézomètres dont je vous ai parlé. Vous voyez ici sur la petite photo la foreuse en action en train de réaliser, il me semble, notre premier ou notre deuxième piézomètre. Vous voyez ici la carte de répartition, donc le territoire de la CABBALR, avec l'ensemble des piézomètres qui sont prévus. En bleu, ce sont les piézomètres qui seront faits dans un second temps, hors projet Water for Tomorrow. En rouge, les forages qui sont en cours. Donc, soit la cimentation est en train de se faire, soit ils sont vraiment en cours. La carte date de quelques jours, donc elle n'est plus forcément à jour. En vert, les piézomètres qui étaient déjà existants avant le projet. Et en orange, jaune, ceux qui ont été faits, et en orange, ceux qui sont à faire. Donc encore une fois, la carte n'est pas tout à fait à jour, donc certains à faire sont en cours ou viennent d'être faits. Voilà. Et en parallèle de la création des piézomètres, on a tout de suite commencé à faire l'instrumentation et la réalisation des limnimètres et des stations météorologiques. Donc ici sur les photos, vous voyez un piézomètre équipé d'une sonde et un limnimètre. Les limnimètres ont été équipés de sondes pour calculer, mesurer la hauteur d'eau et le débit du cours d'eau. Les stations météo vont nous permettre de recenser les températures locales et la pluviométrie. Et nous avons aussi équipé les forages d'eau potable que nous utilisons aujourd'hui pour alimenter nos usagers en eau potable et les forages qui sont aujourd'hui fermés pour de multiples raisons. Et on a aussi instrumenté l'ensemble des piézomètres au fur et à mesure de leur réalisation. Les sondes qui sont installées dans les piézomètres calculent toute la température et l'altimétrie du niveau d'eau dans l'aquifère et localiser, de façon plus localisée, également la conductivité et les paramètres d'oxydation-réduction pour, dans certaines localisations du territoire où nous supposons des problèmes de qualité. Ces données sont ensuite récupérées et envoyées sur un serveur FTP où les données sont mises publiques, sont rendues publiques, mises à disposition. Et également, elles sont récupérées vers différents logiciels pour faire de la prédiction sécheresse. Voici une carte qui recense les forages qui sont équipés, instrumentés. Donc encore une fois, cette carte est également pas tout à fait à jour. Donc les petits carrés représentent nos forages d'eau potable, et les ronds représentent les piézomètres. Donc certaines instrumentations sont en cours. L'instrumentation pour le coup est quasiment finie. Il restera à instrumenter aussi les piézomètres qui viennent d'être faits et qui sont encore à faire. Et donc à l'instant, je viens de vous parler de logiciels de prédiction sécheresse. Donc 2 logiciels ont été développés sur le CABBALR, sur le territoire. Donc il y a MétéEAU Nappes qui a été développé par le BRGM et dont vous aurez la présentation après. Et le logiciel EMI que je vais vous présenter ici. Donc c'est un logiciel qui va récupérer justement les données recueillies par l'instrumentation sur le serveur FTP, qui va faire un système de validation de la donnée via différents algorithmes. et qui va ensuite en faire des tableaux de bord et des graphiques pour faciliter la compréhension de la donnée. Donc ici, vous voyez une carte qui nous montre la localisation de nos forages et de toutes nos installations, pardon. Et avec un petit indicateur, donc là, ça doit être l'indicateur sécheresse, qui nous montre l'état de chaque point par rapport à un historique. Donc ici, je vous présente un tableau de bord. Donc ici, c'est sur un piézomètre qui est suivi depuis un certain nombre d'années. Donc on peut voir l'état de l'aquifère, qui est en jaune avec un niveau modérément bas, avec aussi un graphique de la prédiction sécheresse. On peut le faire à différentes temporalités. On peut aller jusqu'à 60 jours de prédiction, ce qui peut nous permettre de justement prendre en compte l'état de la sécheresse et de prendre des décisions assez rapidement pour éviter d'arriver à des cas critiques où on va devoir couper l'eau à certains usagers. Et ici, un graphique, donc justement avec en bleu la courbe qui est étudiée, et en noir, en pointillé noir, vous voyez la prédiction. Donc encore une fois, ce graphique a quelques jours, mais on voit bien qu'on arrive dans un niveau de sécheresse modérément bas. Ensuite, je tiens à dire tout de même, pour l'ensemble du réseau, et notamment les piézomètres qui viennent d'être faits, il faut un certain nombre d'historiques pour que la prédiction sécheresse soit validée et correcte. Donc c'est un logiciel qu'aujourd'hui on utilise pour recenser les niveaux d'eau, mais la prédiction va être faite d'ici quelques mois, voire quelques années, sur la plupart de l'instrumentation. Puisque les historiques ne sont pas encore suffisamment fournis pour être fiables. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you very much, Florine. It's a period of policy change at CABBALR at the moment, so it's great to hear about the establishment of this network, which will help CABBALR to have plenty of data and evidence with which to make their policy decisions. So we're going to stay on the topic of groundwater and move very smoothly across to a presentation by Bruno Mougin and Cyril Bourgeois, who are going to talk about the decision support tool that Florine mentioned in her presentation. I welcome you to the stage.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We are very happy to be with us. Unfortunately, we are two French, so our presentation will be in French, so I can switch. Donc bonjour à tous. Donc nous allons vous parler d'un outil qui s'appelle MétéEAU Nappes, qui est un outil d'aide à la décision pour caractériser en temps réel l'état des eaux souterraines et prévoir leur évolution. Donc je vais également, comme Florine, parler des eaux souterraines et vous montrer ce qu'on a été capable de réaliser dans le cadre du projet Water for Tomorrow. Donc le projet, l'outil MétéEAU Nappes, un de ses objectifs, c'est d'avoir ce système d'alerte précoce des sécheresses. Et on va se baser en fait sur du suivi en continu de la profondeur des nappes phréatiques. Et on a la chance, au niveau de notre établissement, de disposer d'un réseau de suivi qui comporte 1600 points sur la France et qui a un historique d'une vingtaine, voire d'une cinquantaine, voire d'une centaine d'années. Donc par rapport au réseau récent que présentait Florine, on a ce gros avantage d'avoir ces données historiques sur lesquelles on peut faire des statistiques. Donc on va suivre en continu l'évolution du niveau des nappes et les mettre à disposition. Et sur certains points sur lesquels on aura travaillé sur la base d'une modélisation qu'on appelle hydrologique globale. Donc c'est un réseau de réservoirs qui sert à reconstituer le niveau d'une rivière ou le niveau d'une nappe. On dispose d'informations pour pouvoir proposer des prévisions de niveau de nappe et donc imaginer comment sera le futur. Donc ces prévisions, on va le faire suivant différents scénarios, soit suivant des scénarios climatiques, il pleut beaucoup, il pleut peu, voire il ne pleut pas du tout. Mais on peut également assembler des informations associées au prélèvement d'eau. Que va-t-il se passer sur le niveau des nappes si les prélèvements sont forts, sont faibles ou sont moyens? Et l'avantage également de l'outil, on vous le présentera, c'est de revenir sur des scénarios passés et d'analyser des données historiques. Alors, quels sont les principes généraux de l'outil? Donc, c'est un site internet qui va venir collecter les informations autour du cycle de l'eau, donc des informations de pluviométrie qui tombent à la surface du sol, des mesures de niveau de nappe, j'en ai parlé, des niveaux historiques et des niveaux mesurés en temps réel, et également des débits de rivière. Donc, toutes ces informations seront collectées et visualisables dans l'outil. Grâce à un travail de modélisation, un modèle qui est encapsulé dans le site internet, on peut proposer des prévisions. Et ce sont des prévisions qui, aujourd'hui, sont rafraîchies tous les mois. Donc, dans les graphiques du site internet, on va également insérer des seuils soit en lien avec des problématiques de hautes eaux, des inondations par remontée de nappe. Mais ici, ce qui va m'intéresser, c'est plutôt des seuils de basses eaux en lien avec des mesures de restriction d'usage de l'eau. Donc, on va appeler ça des seuils piezométriques sécheresse. Alors, je vais vous montrer quelques captures d'écran du site internet. Je n'aurai pas le temps de vous le montrer en direct. Alors, le premier écran, c'est, vous voyez sur cette carte, quelques points à proximité de Paris. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on va visualiser sur cette carte? D'abord, la forme du symbole des points. La forme des symboles va montrer l'évolution récente des niveaux. Donc, on va représenter ça avec des triangles orientés vers le haut si la nappe monte, des triangles vers le bas si la nappe descend, et des carrés si le niveau est stable. Ensuite, les pastilles de couleurs vont donner une information sur le niveau statistique du mois en cours. On aura des points plutôt en bleu si le niveau est très haut par rapport aux mesures historiques, ou en rouge si le niveau est très bas. Alors, grâce à cette cartographie, quand on se connecte sur le site internet, on a la situation du jour. Donc, par exemple, aujourd'hui, au 22 mars 2023. Grâce à un calendrier, on peut revenir sur une situation passée, regarder comment ces points seraient coloriés, par exemple l'été 2022 qui a été très sec. Et on peut également interroger sur ce calendrier la situation future. Donc on va choisir une date future et on va également préciser quel est le scénario climatique. Par exemple, un scénario où il pleut très peu sur les 6 prochains mois et les points vont venir se recolorier en direct sur le site internet. Alors, sur cette deuxième capture d'écran, il faut imaginer qu'on va cliquer sur l'un de ces points et venir interroger sa fiche dynamique. Donc, je parle d'une fiche dynamique puisqu'à chaque fois qu'on va se connecter sur cette fiche, les informations seront rafraîchies. Elles seront nouvelles chaque jour. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on va voir? On va voir une carte qui localise les stations de mesure en temps réel, de la pluie, du niveau des nappes, du débit des rivières. Et on aura un graphique associé qui représentera ces informations. Donc vous avez le graphique en bas à gauche qui représente le débit de la rivière en orange, le niveau de la nappe en bleu, et les histogrammes bleu clair représentent la pluie. Ça permet également de visualiser les liens entre la nappe et la rivière. Alors, un autre graphique accessible sur cette fiche dynamique représente donc ces prévisions en sortie de modèle de niveau de nappe. Donc, ça correspond aux courbes que vous voyez en pointillés qui vont du bleu sur des scénarios de pluie où il pleut beaucoup au scénario plutôt en orange ou jaune quand il pleut très peu. Et on a même une courbe extrême sur un scénario où il ne pleuvrait pas pendant 6 mois. Donc ces prévisions sont accessibles sur cette période de 6 mois, comme je vous le disais, rafraîchies tous les mois, grâce à des nouvelles données qui viennent s'engranger. Et sur ce graphique, vous avez également en bas les seuils piezométriques sécheresse qui sont représentés par des marches d'escalier, puisqu'ils sont différents chaque mois. Et l'intérêt de cet outil, c'est à partir du moment où le niveau des nappes commence à baisser, à regarder que donneraient nos prévisions et si ces prévisions risquent de passer sous ces seuils sécheresse. Et s'ils passent sous ces seuils sécheresse, il risque d'y avoir des mesures de restriction d'usage de l'eau. Donc on peut anticiper une situation d'étiage à venir. Alors pour des points qui sont des points de suivi de niveau de nappe qui sont situés à côté de prélèvements d'eau en lien avec différents usages, agricoles, eau potable ou industrie, on a la possibilité également dans nos travaux de modélisation d'intégrer des scénarios de prélèvement. Donc sur ce graphique, en haut à droite, vous avez une petite boîte qui va permettre à l'utilisateur de sélectionner ce scénario de prélèvement pour savoir si les prélèvements sont très forts, très faibles ou moyens. Donc quand on va sélectionner par exemple un scénario de prélèvement fort, les niveaux de nappe vont baisser et on pourra aussi imaginer que seront les prévisions et s'il y aura des restrictions d'usage de l'eau si ces prélèvements sont forts. Et à l'inverse, si on choisit des prélèvements faibles, les niveaux vont remonter et peut-être passer au-dessus de ces seuils. Alors, un autre avantage de cet outil, c'est, je l'ai dit, de revenir sur une situation passée et de se dire comment se serait passé l'été si on avait demandé aux usagers de l'eau de prélever différemment. Et par exemple, si on avait connu une crise sécheresse, si on avait prélevé moins dans les nappes phréatiques, est-ce qu'on aurait pu passer au-dessus de ces seuils et ne pas avoir de mesures de restriction d'usage de l'eau? Voilà, je passe la parole à Cyril.
Merci. Tu voulais pas le faire, ça?
Ah oui, pardon. Excusez-moi. Il me restait une dernière diapositive à présenter et qui n'est pas la moindre, puisqu'en fait, ça concerne toutes nos activités menées dans le cadre du projet Water for Tomorrow. Donc, on a travaillé sur les développements que j'ai évoqués sur le territoire de la CABBALR, donc le territoire que Florine vient de vous montrer. Et les 3 carrés rouges que vous voyez sur cette carte, avec des ronds entourés, correspondent à nos points de suivi, qui sont suivis depuis 50 ou 100 ans. Et les ronds que vous voyez autour sont les zones d'influence sur lesquelles on va aller chercher les usagers de l'eau, donc des prélèvements en lien avec l'eau potable, l'industrie ou l'agriculture. Et ce sont ces informations qui ont été intégrées dans le site Internet. Donc ces points sont disponibles. Et pour compléter le maillage du territoire, on a intégré également 13 autres points venant du logiciel que vous a montré Florine, qui s'appelle EMI. Et on a développé des passerelles entre ce logiciel et le nôtre pour pouvoir colorier des points et connaître la situation également en temps réel du niveau des nappes, pour pouvoir avoir cette vision globale sur le territoire. Excuse-moi, Cyril.
Merci Bruno. Donc, dans la suite de la présentation, je vais essayer de vous montrer comment on peut utiliser MétéEAU Nappes avec les acteurs pour affronter le problème de sécheresse. Donc effectivement, comme Bruno vous l'a montré, il y a beaucoup d'informations dans le site. Donc l'idée, c'est un peu d'y aller par étapes en fonction des objectifs qu'on se fixe. Donc dans un premier temps, si on l'utilise avec un public assez large qui peut regrouper aussi bien des citoyens que des acteurs de l'eau, etc., première utilisation possible de MétéEAU Nappes, c'est d'utiliser comme un système de sensibilisation aux risques futurs des sécheresses. Par exemple, comme vous l'avez dit Bruno, le MétéEAU Nappes permet de se projeter à 3-6 mois dans le futur sur les niveaux de nappes souterraines. Donc par exemple, ici, je vous ai mis un petit graphique où en noir, vous avez la courbe noire, c'est la situation réelle. Et en rouge, c'est une projection climatique. Par exemple, ici, un scénario où il va pleuvoir assez faible. Et donc, ça permet de voir que si on fait une simulation, dans 2-3 mois, on risque de passer sous des seuils sécheresse qui peuvent aller des alertes qui vont correspondre en France à des premières mesures de restriction jusqu'à des scénarios de crise qui vont entraîner des interdictions de certains usages. Donc ça, c'est un exercice qu'on peut faire régulièrement ou mettre comme lettre d'information, bulletin d'information pour sensibiliser sur les risques de sécheresse à venir. Ensuite, On peut également l'utiliser comme un outil d'apprentissage, parce que contrairement par exemple aux autres surfaces où les prélèvements, vous voyez directement les débits dans les rivières qui peuvent être impactés, dans les nappes souterraines, en fonction de l'inertie, c'est un peu plus compliqué. Et donc là, l'avantage de MétéEAU Nappes, c'est que par exemple, en rejoignant une situation, en allant dans le passé, dans une situation où il y a eu une sécheresse mais passée, on peut faire varier les prélèvements et du coup regarder que si on avait fait des politiques publiques différentes qui avaient agi sur les prélèvements, est-ce qu'on aurait pu éviter la sécheresse? Ou est-ce qu'on aurait pu en tout cas réduire son impact? Donc là, par exemple, c'est un peu pareil. Je vous mets toujours la courbe en noir, c'est un peu la situation, enfin, c'est une situation réelle passée. En rouge, c'est la situation passée qui a amené une situation de crise, une situation de sécheresse. Et puis on se dit, si on avait réduit un petit peu nos prélèvements quand on avait eu cette information-là, on se rend compte finalement qu'on aurait pu réduire la période de crise. Et si on avait réduit énormément les prélèvements, on l'aurait quasiment évité. Donc ça permet de un peu aider les acteurs ou les gestionnaires de l'eau à comprendre un peu ce lien qu'il peut avoir entre prélèvement et niveau piezométrique sur une période de 3, 4, 5, 6 mois. Évidemment, ce travail peut aussi être fait sur une situation actuelle, sachant que l'avantage énorme de le faire sur une situation passée, c'est qu'on s'affranchit des aléas météo et donc on a vraiment juste le lien prélèvement niveau piezométrique. Une autre façon également de faire, si on veut renforcer le travail sur l'anticipation et sur la gestion anticipée des sécheresses, c'est de se dire, OK, précédemment, on a vu que si on réduisait nos prélèvements assez fortement, on pouvait éviter la sécheresse. OK. Et donc là, la question, c'est de dire, mais à partir de combien de temps faudrait-il le faire? Est-ce qu'il faut le faire? Est-ce que ça suffit de le faire un mois avant que le modèle nous dise qu'on passe en crise sécheresse? Est-ce qu'il faut quasiment le faire 2 mois avant, 3 mois, enfin 4 mois avant? Et donc ça, en faisant plusieurs simulations à plusieurs pas de temps, on peut amener les gestionnaires de l'eau à mieux comprendre la date à partir de laquelle il est vraiment nécessaire d'agir si on veut éviter que la sécheresse arrive dans l'été. Donc, voilà. Donc là, c'est 3 petits exemples qui peuvent être généralisés un peu partout. Et dans le cas de la CABBALR, donc pour faire un peu un spoiler du guide en fac où vous avez toute la démarche qui est un peu plus détaillée, on est capable d'aller plus loin. Donc dans ce travail qu'on a fait sur la CABBALR, ça a permis par exemple, vu que le contexte géologique c'est des nappes inertielles, avec des temps de retour assez longs d'1 an, on s'est par exemple rendu compte que agir au printemps, ça ne suffit pas dans ce type de nappe. Il faudrait par exemple commencer beaucoup plus tôt, voire même se poser la question dès l'hiver d'agir sur les prélèvements pour anticiper et éviter une crise l'été. On s'est rendu compte aussi également que nos indicateurs français de sécheresse, ce n'est pas forcément les plus pertinents. Il y en a peut-être d'autres qui sont plus pertinents à viser, etc. Et donc ça, c'est tout un accompagnement qu'on peut faire, mais qui est plus cas par cas en fonction des acteurs locaux. Donc, pour conclure tout ça, MétéEAU Nappes, comme vous avez montré, Bruno, précédemment, donc ça permet de fournir des informations en temps réel sur les niveaux piezométriques, ainsi que des interfaces au sein d'une interface web plutôt ergonomique, et qui, par son système de prévision, permet de fournir des informations assez facilement utilisables par et avec les décideurs. Et donc, notamment avec les décideurs, si je résume un peu ce que je dis, on peut l'utiliser de différentes façons, comme outil d'information et de sensibilisation, quelle va être la situation future dans les prochains mois, comme outil d'apprentissage. On a vécu une sécheresse, notamment celle de l'année passée, est-ce qu'on aurait pu l'éviter ou diminuer les risques si on avait agi autrement, et comme outil de réflexion dans une démarche un peu plus prolongée de plus long terme avec les acteurs. Voilà. Merci pour votre attention.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much to all the speakers in that session. It's good to have a mix of projects from both nations. We're going to move on swiftly to the Q&A to allow as much time as possible for a bit of question and discussion before lunch. So if I could invite the following to join me on the stage, please. Bruno and Cyril, if you want to come back, and Florine, and Hugh and Alison and Mahmoud, please. Come and take a seat. Hope you've all been saving your most difficult questions for these guys. musical chairs. Okay, so we've got about half an hour for questions. I'll repeat the questions from Slido that we're going to answer, and speakers will obviously reply in their native language. So I'm going to keep my headset on, and I suggest you do too. Brilliant. Okay, so looking at Slido, we've got a number of questions that have come up. Feel free to add to them as we're talking and things come to mind. The first question that is highest up my list, I'm actually going to use a chair's prerogative and save that for the afternoon. It's a question from Tom Mann about hydrological models. So I'm just going to park that and ask that this afternoon when we're talking much more specifically about modelling and hydrological models. So, you can see the questions on the screen. Fantastic. So next on my list, I've got a question on improving soil health. And we all know that improving soil health to increase water retention is absolutely essential to maximising benefits for future rainfall. And I'd like to ask the panel, how do we incentivise this at scale? I'm quite happy to take views from a number of people on the panel. I think this is quite a broad issue that, across all the work that we'll be doing to incentivising stakeholders. But I'm going to start with Mahmoud, because you were presenting specifically around this area.
So am I clear? Is it working? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question of how could we technically induce behavior change? So how can we incentivize farmers to actually take action in changing their practices, or, if I understood the question correctly, to invest in to change their soil moisture, soil practices? So I think the first essential step is to actually build a trustworthy bridge of communication, such as the likes of SuperWag, to communicate with the target audience, which is the farmers in this case, and demonstrate to them the added value that these actions could bring to their business, the added value of increasing water retention through the soils and how that could improve the productivity of their farming business, communicate the future predictions of reduced water and how could this, on the long run, increase the sustainability and resilience of their business. And we should also work on demonstrating what kind of actions that they could undertake to tackle this problem. So I could refer you to the likes of the Sustainable Farming Initiative on the Gov website, which has multiple very useful guidance how to tackle extreme weathers, how to tackle water scarcity, to preserve and increase the productivity of your farming business. Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything to that question? Hugh?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there are incentives already out there in terms of elms and what have you. But I remember a quote in terms of that there are only something like 40 harvests left, and we keep going on the way we are. And I think that's the biggest incentive to a sustainable industry. Is that okay? Yeah. So it's about awareness as well, and I'm sure all of the farmers know this. The soil is the lifeblood of their business, so it needs to be protected. So I think there's incentives in terms of financial incentive, but also the incentive to keep the business going.
So you'll be pleased to know that I've refreshed my tablet and it now matches what's on the screen. So the next question is also about farmers. And Tom has asked, farmers who say that they can't adapt to reductions in water availability, so I guess this is with reference to Hugh's survey results, are going to be very vulnerable to future changes. How do we help them to sustainably manage water? So there obviously are some overlaps with what we've just discussed, but I'm going to come directly back to you, Hugh, on this one to make a start.
Thanks, Tom. Reading the question, I think the first bit is farmers that say they can't adapt need to. I think we've all said and we've shown today that water is threatened. There's a water shortage, so adaptation is a must for everybody. I think there's two key words for me there, and that's we and sustainable. We, as the regulator, have to protect the environment, but what we can do is provide the information in such a way that the farmer can make a reasonable business decision on certainty. And you'll hear later from Harry about groundwater abstraction maps. There will be reductions, but we need to promote and communicate those reductions in such a way that an abstractor, a farmer, has a level of certainty to make based business decisions. And then there's a big question about what is sustainable, and we've talked today about practices and what have you. Is it a sustainable use of water when we have our food producers struggling, and instead as the regulator we can restrict them with Section 57s, we have the public filling hot tubs, paddling pools, washing cars. That is not sustainable. So there's a wider awareness collectively. Can we reduce demand to mitigate for drought so that the farmers can grow our food? But we all have to adapt. I think that's the key question, the key answer I would take from that, and we have to adapt together.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Does anyone else on the panel want to add to that, or shall we move on? No? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so as I said, we're going to hold the hydrological model questions for later. I'm going to go to Isabel's question, which is about MétéEAU Nappes. So I'm going to ask Bruno or Cyril, you can fight over who answers this. How will you disseminate the use of this tool to users? And is there any specifically strategy or workshops or plans for dissemination?
Well, thank you very much, Isabel, for this question. It's very interesting. In fact, during Water for Tomorrow project, we did workshops in the CABBALR pilot site. And we explain how it works, and we try to know how users will use this tool. And we have a lot of exchange together, and it was very useful. And I can add something that this website is public. Everyone can connect to it. So we also give a user guide. So everyone can see it and to work and to find how to use this website.
Thank you very much. And just an additional question on that then. If the website is available to the public, is there any kind of security risk to people knowing where the boreholes and things are, or do you see that as a fantastic opportunity for members of the public and abstractors to really understand what's going on in real time?
Sorry.
Do you want me to repeat that? Okay, no worries. So just to kind of follow straight on from that question and link to another question that was asked, and I wondered, you mentioned that the site is available to the public to see the results, and I just wondered whether there's any security risk around people knowing where the boreholes are, or whether you consider it's just a completely positive tool so that people can really see what's coming, as you mentioned, in terms of drought.
It's about the question of Ben, or it is not?
In terms of your data and the MétéEAU Nappes site, is there a security risk to people knowing where the boreholes are on your monitoring network, or is it?
No, we don't have a risk because it's not boreholes used for drinking water. It's only boreholes where we follow the groundwater level. So we don't have risk anymore.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's take those questions. Okay, so the next question is for Hugh. Again, you're up plenty today. And it's a question from Philippe around how the SuperWAG was set up. Was it specifically set up for Water for Tomorrow? Or did it exist previously? And are you going to continue to maintain the group post-project?
Yeah, thanks, Philippe. It was set up for Water for Tomorrow. The reason why it was set up is because, as explained, our communication was a little bit fragmented with the water abstraction groups themselves. So the water abstraction groups existed, SWAG, BAWAG, the LARC Abstractance Group and others, but we were talking to them individually, which for me as a project seemed inefficient because it does breed that sort of element of time lags in communication and the ability for sort of miscommunications before you get to the next. So it was set up predominantly for Water for Tomorrow, but I stand by the merits of setting up in that way because it's an efficient model to talk to as many abstractors or to as many representatives of abstractors as possible. In terms of continuing it beyond the project, my aim was always that the WAGs own that group. It wasn't about the Environment Agency, it was about the water abstraction groups working together as a collective voice to communicate with the regulator, or indeed any other sector. So I'm pleased to say that we've had numerous meetings, and from what I'm hearing, they're going down that route in terms of formalising themselves into I'll use the word entity. I don't think that's the word I'm looking for, but they recognise the need to formalise themselves in that. So I hope it will continue. I've committed to continue chairing it at the very least for at least another year to get that going, but they have to own that group for it to move forward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Hugh, and yeah, very, very important area. Right, we're going to move now to Alison and to some questions on the participatory model. I've spent ages making sure I say that correctly. Can you tell us, Alison, how can it be constructed so that it can be used to help make active decisions? So, for example, on farm business planning or resource sharing or policy?
So I think what the models are really good at is drawing general conclusions. So the models might be useful to say that, this is an action that generally is good. It shows that it's really focused on the dynamics of the system. So it's not, the models aren't really intended to be useful for a specific farm decision about their farm management. But they are really good at drawing general conclusions, and they're also really good at identifying unintended consequences of particular actions as well. So it might be possible to run a scenario where you say, what will happen if we implement this kind of action, run it through the model, and because you've got the whole system mapped out, you might see an unintended and potentially undesirable consequence that you hadn't expected in another part of the system, which is really useful information. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alison. Okay, so there was another question on participatory modelling, which I'll go straight into. It seems to flow well. So Rory has asked, in terms of effort and skills, is it easier to develop the qualitative model than to upgrade it to a quantitative model? So I guess the relative pros and cons, which I believe you have been thinking about before.
Well, when you're developing the qualitative model, you're sitting down with the stakeholders and you're saying, what's the story that your sector would like to tell to the other sectors? What are the factors that it's important that we include in this model, and what is the story that we're telling? Whereas when it comes to quantifying the models, you'll be saying, okay, so we think that this variable influences this variable. When this variable changes, how does that influence the second variable? Can you draw me a graph that's, is the relationship linear, or is it an S-curve? So it's different, and I'd say that both of those phases do require a lot of engagement and active involvement and participation from the stakeholders. So they are both of those require an input and effort from stakeholders, but the questions that you're dealing with are quite different.
Thank you very much, Alison. Okay, so now we've got some kind of more specific related to agricultural and food processing. So Charlotte has asked, do we link all this to a food strategy? So I guess that's maybe asking about the next steps and how we make sure that this is integrated with the work that farmers and government are actually doing. I'm going to start with you again, Alison, if that's all right, just in terms of the links to policy and things that you've already been considering in the model.
Yeah. Am I okay to talk about elms? And yeah, so one of the next steps for the project is that we're actually working on an elms, so that's an environmental land management strategy test and trial project. And so we're hoping to take some of the work that we've done for Water for Tomorrow, and then start building agricultural policies into that. So looking at potential agricultural policy and mapping it through, how will that influence farmers' decision-making processes, and what impact does that have on our model? And so I think that would be a really good use of the participatory modelling, is to take it on and start tying it into agricultural policy, and then through and looking at tying that into food security and water management strategies and connecting everything together. That's the point of the method. Yeah.
Anyone else want to add to that, Hugh? Yeah, come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's absolutely needs to be a food strategy, but I think it's bigger than just the UK, especially with carbon and the import of food from sort of more water-thirsty areas, perhaps. So 100% it needs to be part of a strategy, but it's a massive strategy that should include water as well. So it's good having a food strategy, it's good having a water strategy. There are lots of strategies. They have to align because they are so interlinked, which I think, Alison's points in terms of unintended consequences, we're starting to see them more and more now in terms of the decisions that we make. So we have to align our strategies.
I absolutely agree with that. Thank you very much, Hugh. Okay, we've got a couple of questions left. I'm going to come to you again, Hugh, with the next question, and then after that, I'm actually going to come to Florine to ask a bit more about stakeholder feedback from the network. So Charlotte's asked whether we can determine what farmers should grow if they're unable to grow or they feel unable to grow potatoes or sugar beet. So can we advise them? Can we suggest what the alternatives are for the future? And is it for us who is it to do that? Whose responsibility?
Thanks, Charlotte. I think we haven't mentioned drought-resistant crops. We have talked about public behaviour quite a bit. To determine whether a farmer can grow a King Edward or a Maris Piper or a more drought-resistant crop needs a huge awareness campaign and a cultural shift. We haven't mentioned supermarkets either, but as I said, I don't have an agricultural background, so I don't understand supermarket protocols, etc. But I hear them a lot. So again, it's that strategy, and should we be growing drought-resistant crops now? And if so, how do we determine that? So if a farmer chooses not to grow sugar beet because it's unprofitable, whatever, what can they be growing instead? And will the supermarket sell it? And will the public buy it? So I think it's part of a huger picture in terms of behavioural change that we need to get cracking on, really.
Yeah, absolutely. If this isn't a bit unfair, given that it's not necessarily your specialist area, but is it fair to ask our French colleagues, is this the level of detail that you think you will be getting into in the future in terms of working with other sectors like agriculture? Do you see that kind of direct discussion with farmers such as that we've just mentioned coming out through your discussions? Florine, is that okay to ask you?
Oui, en fait, on a surtout travaillé avec la seconde partie qui est sur le site de la CABBALR qui va être présentée cet après-midi, des ateliers participatifs avec différents usagers sur le territoire. Et on travaille notamment avec la Chambre d'agriculture. Et là, on est en train de voir justement pour les suites du projet Water for Tomorrow avec la Chambre d'agriculture pour mettre en place un certain nombre de projets, notamment sur les aires d'alimentation de captage et les périmètres de protection des captages, notamment avec des études sur de nouvelles procédures d'engrais, des passages de bio, des agriculteurs qui passent au bio, des agriculteurs aussi qui essaient de nouvelles semences, de nouveaux produits à consommer et à cultiver. Mais on s'est aussi rendu compte que l'agriculture dépendait beaucoup de l'agro-industrie. Et donc, il faut également faire venir ces agro-industries, des agro-industries particulières pour que les cultures agricoles changent.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I think it is important, that's quite loud, it is important that we continue to make those links between our nations. That was obviously a large point of the project, to make sure that at every stage what we're doing, whether it's modelling or engagement, that we're learning from each other, and that's something we've all kind of committed to do as partners as we carry on from this project, to kind of check in and kind of exchange advice and techniques. So that's fantastic, thank you. I'm going to come back to you, Florine, or Bruno, or Cyril, whoever prefers, just to ask about the data you've been producing, because we've found in our work that getting really local data that abstractors and industries and things can access is really important, and it's really valuable to them. We heard, for example, through Sarah's presentation about the willingness to engage in that. So we wondered if you've already had any specific feedback from stakeholders about the scale of what you're doing and the type of data you're making available to them. Do they feel that it will be really useful? Are they aware of it already, for example?
Alors nous, pour le coup, on a des personnes qui sont intéressées, notamment l'agence de l'eau, les services de l'État. En fait, les services de l'État en général sont très friands des informations qu'on peut leur donner et des rapports qu'on peut leur faire avec nos données, notamment pour les sécheresses. Là, on est en train de préparer l'été. Et actuellement, les services de l'État sont très friands des données qu'on peut leur envoyer. On a également le SAGE de la Lys, qui le réseau limnimétrique qu'on a mis en place, en complément du réseau piézométrique, est en complément de leur propre réseau. Et ils sont également très friands des données, notamment pour les vigilances Vigicru. Et on a aussi plusieurs services internes à la CABBALR qui sont intéressés par toutes ces données, effectivement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It reminds me of things like the Catchment Data Explorer here in the UK, which provides a valuable source of information for stakeholders. So good to get that information out there. Thank you very much. Oh, you want to? Yes, of course. Please do carry on.
Just a few words. I want to add just something. Just to know that in France, collecting withdrawals data is a great challenge. It's very difficult. So we try to do it in the CABBALR web pilot site. We collected a lot of data, and I can also say that without good data, we can't do any models, and of course we can't anticipate the drought events.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Point well made. Okay, so while we've been talking, we've had a couple more questions come through. So there's a question from John on the monitoring network. So he's also been talking about improving the monitoring network in France, and it would be good to understand how that compares to what we already have in the east of England. I'm going to start by asking you, Mahmoud, is that appropriate, or do you want to hand over to you?
That's fine. I mean, it actually relates to the other question on there in terms of what we can provide, drought prediction. So, yeah, it's very comparable. We have an extensive surface and groundwater monitoring network that we produce in the Environment Agency hydrological summaries on a monthly basis that are shared with abstractors. We also produce something that's called prospects for irrigation. So I've mentioned the spray irrigators a lot. That is a guideline on the conditions. We normally produce it in February for this time of year, but that always gives it to a nod for potentially the need for Section 57 restrictions should we move into drought. So it is kind of almost like a drought forecast tool, giving people sight of what might be coming for the growing season. But yeah, it's comparable. We have an excellent groundwater network plus surface water network that I think we're pretty good at communicating.
Is that data also publicly available?
Yeah, I believe it is. Yes, I think it is.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. A couple more questions have come in. So we've got a question on whether there's Water Resources East resources that we, farm advisors, can give to farmers about future drought predictions in the East and recommended practices. So obviously, I'm guessing maybe this is a question for me, that Hugh's made a mention of in terms of data and forecasts from the different kind of regional models that exist. So there will be quite a number, I think, of technical data sets and kind of input and output data sets from some of the modelling that we're going to hear about this afternoon that will be made available. But that does involve and it does require, quite an element of technical background, and I think before that we need to make sure that through our engagement, we're starting with a full understanding of the problem and what's appropriate for the specific farm that's having those discussions. It could be a very different situation for individual kind of farmers and growers as to how much water they use or what crops they've got and how much water those crops use. So specifically at the Water Resources East level, we're not a kind of on-the-ground organisation, so we won't specifically be producing kind of farm packs for advisors, for farm advisors at the moment. Our role is going to change slightly, though. We are producing our kind of regional water resource management plan. That's the draft version has already been to consultation, and that closed recently. And our final version will be produced kind of later this year. But after that, it's considered that Water Resources East might start to take much more of a role in drought management. So in understanding what's coming, particularly in communicating that message, and therefore I think, potentially, yes, there are opportunities for us to work with all of our partners, whether it's the WAGs or the NFU and the Environment Agency and others, to make sure that we're looking at, kind of the comms elements. But I think that the most important overall is to say that there's so much to do here, and there's so many different levels of information that people need. And what we need to do is try to be as joined up as possible to make sure that whether it's Natural England farm advisors or Anglian Water farm advisors or Water Resources East or the EA, that we are communicating in a way that's joined up. And I think we envisage ourselves maybe doing that more through groups like the WAGs, where we can make sure that information is coming in quite clearly and have those discussions in a more integrated way. So thank you very much for that question. Even more are coming in, so it's good. We've still got at least 7 minutes left to go through these. Right, okay, so Rory has asked whether France has an equivalent to a Section 57. So this is a primary legislation that requires abstractors to stop abstracting during droughts. So is there something like this? And if not, could you introduce it? Is that a question, Bruno, that you can take? Yeah, thank you.
Du coup, je vais répondre en français. It's not obvious. Oui, merci Rory pour la question. Donc, je pense qu'on doit avoir quelque chose d'équivalent. En fait, en France, ce sont les préfets qui décident de restreindre l'usage de l'eau, et ils se basent sur un examen de tout un tas d'informations sur les données météorologiques, sur le débit des rivières et sur le niveau des nappes. Et j'en ai parlé un petit peu au niveau de ma présentation. Dans certains points d'eau souterraine, il y a également des seuils qui sont affichés dans des arrêtés préfectoraux. Et si ces seuils sont dépassés, si les niveaux descendent sous ces seuils, et c'est exactement pareil pour le niveau des rivières, le préfet peut dire je restreins certains usages de l'eau. Je demande à des industriels de prélever 30% de moins que ce qu'ils font habituellement. Donc oui, je pense qu'on a l'équivalent en France.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll definitely get around to these two questions, but if we don't have time to answer any more, but you want to ask any more on Slido, please still do. Some of the questions might be relevant to pick up in a later session, but also we will be summarising the questions, and further information will be available afterwards by email to attendees. So don't hold back from registering your question if you want to. Okay, I'm going to come first to the question from Jim. So Jim has said this is the elephant in the room question. I'm not quite sure how that translates into French. But climate change, will it result in a greater farming water demand? Yes or no? I'm going to come first to Alison and then maybe Hugh, if you're happy with that. In terms of, I guess this is partly about the science, but partly about the perception of how people think they will adapt their business with climate change and how they will use water.
Yeah, I suppose the obvious answer to that is, yes, it could. With climate change, with longer, drier summers, I think demand additional water during dry periods. But it also depends how farmers respond to that. So if they change their crops, for example, that might counteract to some extent the impact of climate change. Yeah, not sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine. The part of the problem, I think, is the uncertainty, isn't it?
The point I'm trying to make is that we're all forecasting, I think, incorrectly, to static. The climate change and using more water
Okay.
demand.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you, just because. So it's not because I want to cut off your question at all. More just because the way the system is set up with the online audiences. No, I think we didn't test the microphone before, so hadn't planned to do a roaming microphone. Because of that, I didn't quite catch what you were saying, unfortunately. But do you want to add to that, Hugh? Because I think it is quite a really important area.
I don't think the demand change. I think the problem that supply won't be there. So you will still need the same amount of water, but climate change says that there will be 81% less water in the rivers. So proportionally, your demand might not change, but we won't be able to deliver it.
Just to add one thing, that is if we don't take action. But if we do become proactive, then we would hope that the demand would decrease in knowing that there will be less supply if we do the right things.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously that risk as well, that it's becoming hotter and drier in the summers, that people actually want more water, which is what we have to play against those challenges, because, as we say, it probably won't be available.
The water value.
Okay, no, and that's a fair point. I think in terms of we all know that water is, particularly in England, I think we did have a bit of discussion yesterday about in France, but the price of water, it isn't that expensive compared to other utilities, and water is become an even more valuable resource than it already is. So something we all need to, as we've all said today, we need to all work together on. Is absolutely a kind of essential to move forward. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the questions. There are a number of questions that have just been added, and as I said, we will try to make sure we've got answers to all of those sent out to everyone. So thank you very much, and do continue to ask questions if you want to get a response to those, but it will be after the session. We're going to move to lunch now, and you've got an hour for lunch, so we've got from 1 till 2, but we will start sharpish at 2 o'clock, and Barry will take over chairing that session when we'll be looking more at decision support models, so in the modelling arena. But I just want to ask you all to give the panel a round of applause and thank them very much for their questions. Thank you very much. Lunchtime.
Thank you.